gentlemen please rise?
You may be seated. Mizmor David, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot tesher bitzeini, al mei menuchot yenahaleini. נפשי שובב, ינחני ומגלי צדק למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צלמוות, לא אירא רע כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, דשנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters. God restores my soul, leads me in paths of righteousness for God's name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I am Cantor Shana Postman from Town and Village Synagogue, and I am the cantor at the synagogue where Mark and Doris and their family are members. And I have had the pleasure and privilege to know the woman who we are here today to pay loving tribute to. We are here today with those here in person and those attending virtually to pay loving tribute to Rita Berger, Surah Rivka, Bat Tzvi Eliezer HaKohen Vesima, whose life has touched everyone here today. It gives me great pleasure to really welcome up her family members who loved her so very much and love her. That love continues on. And they will now share words of remembrance and love. This includes cousins, grandchildren, and children, starting with Lillian.
Oh, where to begin? This is one of the saddest days of my life. Rita, I am angry. You left me as the position of being the family elder. My head is full of memories from your wedding to Simon, to Saturdays in Shachmunis, and to Summers in Oceanside, and on and on and on. Rita was like an aunt to me, a sister to my parents. She was a woman of class, patience, empathy, and love of family. I am sure everyone here today has their own special memories. May she and Simon be doing their dancing in heaven. To Susan, Ellen, and Mark, may memories of your mom keep you warm. And I can't even see. And to Amy, Liat, Talia, Lexi, Rachel, Liat, Noah, also. Thank you to Rita, especially for letting me practice how to be a mother on Ellen and Mark. Changing diapers, feeding, and so on. When Jeff was born, I was fully prepared. And I'd like to read something that my cousin Nurit, our cousin Nurit, posted from Israel this morning. This is from Nurit Agiv. May her memory be a blessing. For me, she will always be remembered as a special, elegant, beautiful, and loving aunt. She has the good life and growing wonderful family that always surrounded her with love and care. She was blessed.
The next three speakers will be Leo, then Lois, and then Harry.
My dearest Rita Shen, you are the last of the Berlin Adlers, and your life story is a trip through the most difficult parts of our history. From Berlin, where a happy family life was shattered by the Nazis, including being separated, finally, in a finality way, from your father, Leo, you trekked into and then later out of Siberia, back to Germany, where in Kulmbach you met Simon and me. Then on to Israel, great memories of Shachbonis, and eventually to Long Beach, which became home to so many of us Adlers, including ultimately my father, your brother, Norbert, to whom you continue to be a devoted sister. You were not only the mother to Susan, Ellen, and Mark, you were also a second mother to me, to Lois, and to Frank, who asked me to say how much you made him feel welcomed and listened to. He misses you very much, Tanta Rita. And you became a wonderful auntie to Alan and Marnie and Kevin. You and Shimmick were my summer home, including introducing me to Schweinerei while I was a child in Montreal, coming here to Long Beach. And your home became home to our children, Stephen, who you called Stephanu, and Pam, and then their spouses and their children, Ethan, Samantha, Chloe, Mia, and Kyle. who always looked forward and loved coming to Long Beach and spending time with you. Their memories of you and Shimmick will never dim. We all love you and kiss you and ask that you give Simon a huge hug and kisses from us. All my love, your Laotian, which to this day Lois still doesn't know how to pronounce.
We invite up Lois, followed by Harry.
As I stand here today, I find it hard to believe that my journey with you after 54 years has come to an end. You and Simon were my biggest champions, and your love and support meant the world to me. Our times together shopping in Cedarhurst and Garden City and Roosevelt Field was always an adventure. You had the patience of Job as I shopped my heart out. Our adventures to Florida together and the laughs we shared gave me memories to last forever. You were not only my aunt, you were my friend and like a mother-in-law to me. For our small family in Canada, you gave us a place to call home and allowed our children and grandchildren to be part of something so wonderful. They too have memories to last a lifetime and pass on to the next generation. I will miss you beyond and take with me all that you graciously shared with me. Rest in peace, my sweet auntie. You will always be remembered and thought of.
Be a little hard to follow. I guess you picked them by which size order? Okay. Well, okay. A few days before Rita's health took its final turn, I started reading Walter Lacker's book, Generation Exodus. I chose it randomly in my library. It's a collective history of young Jews who left Germany in the years leading up to, some cases after the war started. Some left voluntarily, some were forced out, some escaped. Some were from generations of German Jews, others children of immigrants from Eastern Europe. They ended up in England, the Americas, Palestine, Russia, China, a variety of more remote places. The theme of the book is how they were shaped by their childhood experiences and how their grit and fortitude enabled them to survive and thrive and contribute to the world to a degree that could not have been predicted. He reports of farmers, soldiers, poets, professors, statesmen. Henry Kissinger was a member of that cohort. Rita deserves a book of her own. She too is a member of that generation. The timeline of her life is pretty well known to most of you here today. Berlin, Poland, Russia, back to Germany, Simon, Israel, Island Park, and Long Beach, which became her base for the longest period of her life. There she raised her beautiful family. There she worked side by side with Simon to build a successful business, and then another, and then another. There she took on the role of matriarch of the family, nurturing a network of nieces, nephews, cousins that's a source of wonder to so many people. There she affirmed her Jewish faith, support for Israel, through membership and leadership in synagogue and numerous other organizations. In later years, after being contacted by Veronique, she served as a source of invaluable information regarding the family's travails in Berlin and Poland, which contributed greatly to the preservation of that history. Even in her last years, I could come to her with a question about the family's history in Berlin, and she was ready with addresses, dates, and details. A century can be a long time, especially a tumultuous one, as Rita lived through. She lived it fully and always with quiet grace and dignity. And we're all lucky to have had her in our lives and keep her forever in our hearts. Thank you.
Amy and Talia are our next two speakers.
Most of you probably know that I basically grew up at my grandparents' house in Lido. And so my childhood memories of being at grandma's house are endless because I was there all the time. In the summer, I spent hours upon hours in their pool, and grandma, who didn't actually know how to swim, would sit out there to watch me, but I wasn't allowed in the deep end until I was much older. And then I would usually get a peach or a plum for a snack. And so every time I bite into a plum to this day, I'm brought back to grandma's house in summertime when you have just come back into the cold air conditioning after, being wet from swimming in the pool. And that's what it feels like every time. She took care of me when I was sick and had to stay home from school. She fed me rye toast and ginger ale and let me watch TV in her room, like The Price is Right and I Love Lucy. And if it was 12:30, she was in the kitchen watching Young and the Restless. Every evening before dinner, she would give me a raw carrot to eat, which now seems like really weird, but in my childhood years, that was just the norm, a raw carrot as an appetizer before dinner. For dinner, she always made me my own salad, just tomatoes and cucumbers. And then a main course was like flounder, veal, or schnitzel, my favorite. And if there were peas, she would also give me a little pusher thing to help get the pea. I've never seen it anywhere else except for grandma's house, but she always gave me a pusher. And then dessert was either ice cream or the Danish butter cookies that came in the blue tin. She always had those in stock too. I lost my first tooth at her house in first grade. Grandma was cooking dinner. I was watching TV in her room and jumping on her bed, which I probably wasn't supposed to do, but I was wiggling my tooth and it fell out. And I so clearly remember running to her to the kitchen to show her, and she was standing at the stove, and she bent over to see more closely what I was holding in my hand because there were a few years when she was taller than me. True. She made sure I practiced my piano. And for a few years, she and Kathy carpooled to bring me and Rebecca to our piano lessons together, always with the requisite stop at Baskin Robbins for a pre-piano lesson treat. But music was always a staple of her house. When you walked up the stairs from the front foyer, there was a tall stereo just to the right at the top of the stairs, and it was usually playing classical music. I used to tell my friends she was a cool grandma because she got speeding tickets and she bought me fashionable clothes, not like the frou-frou stuff that other grandmas bought for their grandkids. As an adult, I had the honor of her standing under the chuppah at mine and Eve's wedding. And most importantly, the joy of seeing her with my daughters, her bubalas. For a long time, we would FaceTime almost every evening when Liat was baby toddler, and she would just watch me feed Liat dinner. And often it was the meatballs that grandma made. Liat loved those meatballs. So every time we came to Long Beach, I would go home with an insulated bag full of frozen meatballs that we could, heat up and feed her for dinner. And Liat and Noah loved their bubby so much, and they realize how special it is to have her in their lives. So Grandma, I will always be your big schnutz, And I love you, and I thank you for helping to raise me and to be a role model and just for being here. Thank you.
This speech about my grandmother is in many ways a companion speech to the one I gave at my grandfather's funeral, because that felt like the natural thing to do. 3.5 years ago, I had organized my words around the poem that was then keeping me company as I worked through what was, at the time, my first major experience of loss. Specifically, that poem is An Arundel Tomb by Philip Larkin, which describes and considers a monument in a British cathedral featuring the stone effigies of a noble couple. The poem is especially known for its final line, "What will survive of us is love," which I used as the theme and refrain of my speech then. It's not lost on me that as I processed the impending loss of my grandfather, I turned to a poem not about an individual, but a couple who, quote, persisted, linked through length and breadths of time. Others have spoken and will speak more at length about my grandparents' tremendous love story, about the profundity and durability of that love. I also, in that other speech, quoted a letter of Larkin's where he expressed doubt about his own line, writing, quote, "Love isn't stronger than death just because statues hold hands for 600 years. It must be said, however, that regardless of its subject's lack of continued physical presence in this world, that tomb does remain as a testament to love, as does my grandparents' ways in both physical, 9 entire human beings, myself included, and many ways otherwise. Plus, 600 years later, a man went to look at that tomb and found it beautiful and wrote a beautiful poem about it. And that leads me to the angle that I will be taking for this speech. I want to speak about a quality of my grandmother's that I think is often, in general, wrongfully undervalued, but that was integral to her and had a profound impact on me. And that is her love of beauty. She had exquisite taste. She loved elegant clothes and shoes, and she was always impeccably put together. Added up over the course of my life, I've spent many hours staring at her glorious tchotchke cabinet full of beautiful things, with a few notable exceptions. She loved beautiful places, from her home overlooking the ocean to Lincoln Center to the many sites of her many travels. She had a tremendous passion for music, which was with her throughout her entire life and which she passed down to her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I have treasured memories of going to the ballet and opera with her as a little girl, and of watching many videos of them together when I was a bigger girl and it was harder for her to get to the theater. As most of you probably know, I'm a director of both theater and opera, and the last show of mine that she was able to see was a stage concert of beautiful vocal music in a beautiful cathedral. I'll always be grateful that I was able to stand where I could see her face as she watched and listened. On the surface, one might find all of this somewhat at odds with some of her other qualities, her pragmatism, for example, or her lack of sentimentality. But I view them as intrinsically connected. She knew what it was to live without beauty, so she understood its importance. And I think that to experience what she did, and then continue to place such high value on beauty and the pleasure it can bring to oneself and others, is an act of profound faith and love. It's an assertion that it's not only possible to continue living after loss and through hardship, but to enjoy that life. That though the world is full of horrors, it's also full of wonderful things, and our capacity for delight is sacred and worth taking seriously. Because my grandmother had no tolerance for, if you pardon my French, bullshit in others or in herself. My mother tells me that when my grandparents first moved into their first real house on Olive Street, they had very little furniture or money, but as soon as they could, they bought an old baby grand piano that took up half the room. Lots of things that can go in a house are bullshit. Music isn't one of them. And beauty is subjective and expansive. There were many works of art in my grandmother's home, but the ones she spent the most time looking at were messily colored pictures from her bubolas. And she may have loved beautiful things, but she knew that what actually mattered, what was most beautiful, had nothing to do with how much something cost, indeed could not be bought. The aesthetic was the least of all dimensions in which she prized beauty. She hated ugliness in hearts and in behavior. She was judgmental when it was warranted, but completely free of judgment for those who didn't deserve it. She didn't care if people lived their life in different ways than her, so long as they weren't making the world less beautiful. She loved to laugh, both with and it must be admitted, sometimes but she never laughed at anything cruel or unkind. She never laughed down. And most importantly, as has been covered, and I'm sure will continue to be covered elsewhere, she and my grandfather treated people beautifully, from the devotion they always showed to family, to the kindness with which they approached anyone in their orbit, to the generosity they showed to strangers. Beauty is as beauty does. Speaking of beauty is as beauty does, I want to talk about my grandmother's hands. They were, like my mother's, although unlike mine, unfortunately, large and strong, with nails that could tear through anything, but were always beautifully manicured. They played piano and cared for children and kept records and organized the house and fed a lot of people and paged through a lot of newspapers and lifted innumerable cups of coffee. My hands are generally cold. I have terrible circulation, and she would semi-jokingly scold me for this and take them in hers to warm them up. As she got older, and she couldn't always find the words she wanted, we would just sit and hold hands and grin at each other, and that said everything needed. And after her final stroke, this past week, the part of her that stayed fully with us the longest was her hand, which held everyone's for days with a grip that was legitimately shocking to me in its strength. I think she had the most beautiful hands in the world. And it's funny, I knew right away that I wanted to conclude this speech by talking about my grandmother's hands, but it wasn't until I sat down to write it that I realized it also leads back to the poem and to what I think is the perfect final image. My grandfather's speech ended with an Arundel Tomb's final line. This one will end with its first two stanzas, as it describes the medieval statues of its title. And for context, because there's some very literary language in here, habits are clothes and a gauntlet is a glove. Okay. Side by side, their faces blurred, the Earl and Countess lie in stone, their proper habits vaguely shown as jointed armor, stiffened pleat, and that faint hint of the absurd, the little dogs under their feet. Such plainness of the pre-Baroque hardly involves the eye until it meets his left-hand gauntlet still clasped empty in the other, and one sees, with a sharp, tender shock, his hand withdrawn, holding her hand. Thank you.
And our final speakers will be Doris, Dave, then Susan, Mark, and Ellen.
Hello. Going seventh means you might repeat other things that you've heard before, but Rita was worth it. So Rita and Simon welcomed me into the family like a daughter. Well, maybe not quite Susan and Ellen level, but still like a daughter. I loved and appreciated them from that day forward, and I will always miss having them in our lives. To me, Rita was a unique combination of strong, brave, loving, funny, kind, fashionable, as Talia said, generous, and if I may, she suffered no fools. I have so many fond memories from the 34 years that I knew her. While I sat with Rita this week, I shared one very personal memory with her while I was sitting by her that meant so much to me. When Lexi was born, I had had an emergency C-section and I was in a lot of pain. And Lexi had to spend the night at the ICU. To make things even harder, I was struggling with postpartum. I was overwhelmed. So when it came time for Lexi's first bath, I worried that I'd get her belly button wet and send her right back to the ICU. So we brought Lexi to Rita's and Simon's on Greenway Road, and Rita calmly placed Lexi in that tub and gently showed me how to wash her. That tub supported Lexi as Rita supported me. During that challenging period, Rita helped me transition from a fearful new mom to a more confident one, able to enjoy my baby daughter Lexi and then Rachel later. I'll be forever grateful to her. I cannot properly honor Rita without including Simon. Their love story, their gratitude for life, their devotion to family, and their boundless generosity. Those are memories that will stay with me forever. Along with my parents, they were also part of that club, a club no one wants to belong to, where the common thread of survivor, memories you wish you want on anyone else, but they did survive. Rita and Simon epitomized what it meant to seize life's opportunities, to live to the fullest with grace, laughter, kindness, and generosity. May Rita's memory be forever a blessing for us all.
Hi, everybody. I know you know that I don't like telling stories, so there's three that, popped into my head over the past couple of days. How do you remember somebody? So life is a story. So I'll start with when Ellen and I first got engaged. We weren't in a rush to get married because it's a second fiddle for both of us. So we just said, when we're ready, we'll do a thing with the rabbi. Well, that was mistake number one. Phone rang at our house and it was Rita, and she said, when do you guys want to get married? And again, we reiterated our wants, and again, we realized that was a second mistake. So she told us, no problem. And we got a phone call about a half hour later, and she goes, March 15th to March 29th. So we didn't want to do the middle of the month. We wanted to stack up the end of the month, so we picked March 29th. So that was something that, will stick with me forever. The next one was a few months later, sitting in the house. Well, actually, it wasn't a few months. I apologize. The garage doors open. People come and go. Amy was a teenager, so friends were coming and going, and I just sit in the kitchen, not paying attention, and I feel something on my shoulder, and I turn around. And there's Rita with a measuring tape measuring me for my talus. So, I mean, to reiterate what everybody else has been saying over the past time here is it's worth repeating. But for me, the last several months, there wasn't a lot of words in our conversations. We would just give each other a look, and we'd both break out hysterical laughing. And the last meal we had together was our weekly Shabbos dinner. She came to our house and she wasn't eating. And Nadi's looking at her, Ellen's looking at her, and I just gave her a silly look. She broke out hysterical and grabbed the ear of corn and went to town. So those are the things that will always stay with me for the rest of my life.
Just want you to know, I think I saw my mother cry twice in my life. It's going to be hard to get through this without doing so myself. And the times that I did see her cry had to do with the death of her mother and her husband. So that was it. In some ways, I had a lot of time to prepare for this, but then in the end, it just feels like too little time. Especially, how quickly things have gone the last 24 hours, but here goes. So I know everyone here knows what a remarkable woman my mother was. The degree to which all of us who were so lucky to have had her in our lives have loved her as a result of how loving she was. Her capacity for love was why she never complained, why you knew she was present and caring despite saying so little. She was a woman of many contrasting qualities. She endured extreme hardships, was tough as nails, and yet there were ways her life was charmed, including her almost 75 years with her charmer in chief, Simon. She was both romantic and pragmatic. She was complex, yet cared most about the basics. She was both reserved and warm. She had an incredible ability to accept whatever life in reality, even at its harshest and most difficult, and was able to do so without bitterness. Her capacity to laugh grew over the course of her long life, and one of the things she laughed at the most was old age itself. She appreciated finer things, but able to enjoy whatever, and didn't overvalue things in comparison to people or experiences. She didn't waste her energy on talk. What mattered most was behavior. Yet she clearly grasped the meaning of words, and especially the integrity and purpose of what was being said. She really appreciated something that was said to make her laugh, or was smart, or was uplifting to others. Nevertheless, ultimately, it was behavior that mattered, and as a result, she was quite the disciplinarian when we were growing up. Yet despite her valuing proper and good behavior based on the times and culture she came from, ultimately she was quite tolerant of those who lived life outside those in current conventional norms. And of course, family was absolutely what was most important to her, immediate and extended. Perhaps because she was robbed of her childhood, she loved children so much. She loved her children. She really, really loved her granddaughters, and really, really, really loved her great-granddaughters. As mentioned, my mother was born on the first Seder night. I thought it was going to be mentioned, but my mother was born on the first Seder night. And she was born in Adler, daughter of a Kohen, which all you Adlers here know means eagle. Some, if not all you Adlers here, probably know that there's a Torah portion in the book of Exodus, Harry, you mentioned Exodus, that features the eagle. Something I learned this past year. This past year, I did a lot of Torah study for the first time in my life. In that Torah portion, God tells Moses to remind the Israelites, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to what I consider to be freedom, love, and peace." According to AI, the significance of the eagle metaphor is that it highlights God's loving protection and care for the Israelites during their exodus. And I got this from AI also. Rashi, I'm joining them, I'll add my bit. Rashi explains that unlike other birds that carry their young in their talons for fear of other predators, the eagle carries its young on its back, fearing only hunters' arrows. This signifies God's direct protection and shielding from harm during their journey. This image conveys the remarkable and special experience, highlighting God's power and tenderness in bringing Israelites to him safely. Mom, you carried us on your strong and powerful wings, and we will be forever grateful.
I had to see my mother cry more often. Mostly it involved my bringing home report cards. A moment of appreciation for the wonderful caregivers in my mother's life over the last 15 years. From the first Kasha to the subsequent Kashas, Basha. Then we moved into the Shvili world, which all begins with N, Nana, and Nati. You've all given of yourselves in so many ways to bring joy to our mother. We all thank you from the bottom of our hearts. The beautiful notes you wrote for us are just incredible. Thank you. Thank you as well to those near and far who've reached out to us to tell us how much Rita meant to them, how they admired and loved her. As a son, and I can tell you a million things about how my mother cared for me, supported me, most of all, laughed with me. She was a pillar of strength, the chief umpire and conciliator when my father and I went too far, a lot of practice, and the shining example of grace under all circumstances these past not so easy years. She had a wicked sense of humor. You have to wonder where that came from, especially due to her early life. But somehow she developed it and resolved to smile her whole life. She would come up with pithy quips as recent as a month ago. 2 quickies. A woman who was a greener was being shown the Crown Hotel. Ellen, you can start crossing off things in your speech. And remarked to her children that she didn't like all the immigrants that are there. My mother's refugees that were there, excuse me. I'm frequently corrected by women. My mother stared at her for a moment and remarked, "And you just came off the Mayflower?" The second, after I smashed the glass under the chuppah, she turned to Dar and said, "No returns." But most of her best remarks were saved for my father. The two of them would just sit, hold hands. Gonna cry while I say the next word, and laugh for hours. I know they were making fun of us. And you could see in the twinkle of their eyes that they were lying through their teeth as they denied it. And went back to giggling. But the voice we should all be hearing from now was silenced 3.5 years ago. However, having spent a few decades as his speechwriter, but more importantly, having listened to him give his speeches, which to no one's surprise veered wildly from what he asked me to write, I think I have a pretty good sense of what he would want to say to the love of his life, his partner for 70+ years. He'd say, "Thank you for 2 wonderful daughters and 1 pain in the neck." He often told everyone, including strangers sitting next to him on airplanes, how you saved his life and made everything you did possible. He was the first person to say he was not the easiest person to live with, and how incredibly lucky he was to have the perfect person with whom to build his life. I had many conversations with my father about the importance of family. I'm going to put on my radio voice, it makes it easier. As he put it, he was in love with our mother, but it was so important that she had a family. He wanted a close family to replace what he had lost. And as all in the family are here to attest, he and my mother valued family above all else. They not only had family values, they lived family values. No distance was too great to travel for a family event, even if it meant leaving one and driving through the night to get to the next. You know who you are. My mother loved her brothers. They took care of her and vice versa. She loved her cousins, and she and Susie and Henny were like sisters. She loved traveling to Israel to be with family, and those were some of her favorite times. Her nephews and nieces, grandnephews and nieces, her cousins' children and grandchildren, their spouses are all family without numbers or the word in-law attached. My parents loved you all, celebrated you, and delighted in everyone. Family is family. There is an exception. Well, 6 exceptions. Amy, Talia, Lexi, Rachel, Liat, and Noah were her greatest joy. She loved seeing them individually, but even more so seeing them all together. For her, that continuity was everything. My mother lived her life building family, honoring family, loving family. She and my father showed up for everyone because that was their greatest joy. I hope everyone here will honor Rita and Simon by being there for each other, always showing up, and always smiling.
Well, thank you all for coming, first of all, and I know what Mom meant to everybody. And you know what? We were lucky. We had her all this time, and for most of the time, she was good and laughing and smiling, and she was just happy when anybody walked through that door. Okay. To say that this little girl from Berlin was amazing is an understatement. She was always very savvy and practical. She had to be, being with Dad all these years. But she was like that from a very young age. Circumstance forced her to be. I'm going to repeat some things, but bear with us. Mom lived a wonderful family life, both immediate and extended. We all learned from her. Her brothers adored her. She was the special little sister. Her extended family was such a big part of her life. All the cousins were always together, something that was still in all of us to this day. That's how they grew up. Hence 60-person cruises, Hanukkah parties, you get the idea. Mom loved her music, especially her Chopin waltzes. We played them for her the last day, and I know she heard that, was happy. Dad once said to David, "Go get mother one of them things," which we knew to mean an iPod. So she was able to. So right there, it's like, she, yeah. She took piano lessons from a deaf teacher until they left Berlin. It was very important to her that we all have music in our lives. As a very young child, I remember baby grand piano in the house on Olive Street and nothing else in that house. Later, a sofa and a smaller piano showed up. Then a better piano after that, which, was what I learned on. Music meant everything to her for the last couple of years. She would sit in the living room watching YouTube and watching Andre Rieu. She loved him and the waltzes. Didn't matter how much you saw the same one over and over again. We even got to take her about 2 years ago. We schlepped her to, what's it called, in Elmont Park, whatever. And she was so happy, she saw them marching in and all that. Education was always important, and I think given the chance, she would have excelled as a student and continued on. She wouldn't have stopped at 4th grade, given her choice. She also had some type of disability with her handwriting. She couldn't write well, and I really think she would have been a lefty. I got it, I know. She would have been a lefty, but the teachers in those days used to hit her hand, and her father used to come and stand up for her. And that's what happened. Mom lived through her father and eldest brother being deported to Poland. She later was smuggled to Poland with our grandmother and Uncle Fedor. She had to watch her father being marched away at night, never to return home. She lived through being on the run, and thankfully, in quotes, headed east to Russia rather than west. She always said that. She always said she wouldn't be here if they had gone west. It was a choice the family had to make, and they traveled with cousins. They were in the what is it called? The ancestral home of Ulanov, Poland, and with cousins who could run still, they went to the east, and those who stayed behind didn't make it. Mom spent the war Siberians. We could never tell her that it was cold outside. You just never went there. She was too young to work, so she ran the household. She cooked, she whatever. She was very wily and quick thinking. She described how she had to steal. They didn't have heat in their room, that was their home. And she went into the manager's office over and over to complain. So she just had enough. So when he wasn't looking or left the room, she stole the coils to heat the heater for their room and like ran back, you know. So she had that. She took it from, okay, she told the story of how her brother Norbert brought home a goat here. And that was, yeah. So where did the goat stay? It had no choice. You needed permission to do anything with the goats. So the goat stayed with their mom, like it was like a pet until Norbert came home with permission. And she walked him, had a rope around him, and then we asked her, well, what happened to the goat? And she just gave us her look, like, you don't know. She knew how to snake her way through the food ration lines. She figured it all out. It was her job to, like, she was tiny and she could sneak through, and she just knew what to do. Once over there, once mommy came over here, she always told me she couldn't stand to pay for food, to wait online for food at the supermarket. So she never stood online long time in the supermarket. I did, or Mark did. We went with her. But she used to go to, at that time, Associated, because there was never any lines, even though it was more expensive. And they didn't have much, but she always complained about the lines in Warbaums. She could also be very funny. Like Mark said, she always had speeding tickets, but one time she was caught speeding, and this is not going to be a mispronunciation. She told the cop, my speedometer was broken. And she got off. During the gas shortage of the 70s, she used her old Russian ways. And she, she would call the guy. He'd put you were allowed $4 at that time, could probably fill that giant Buick LeSabre or whatever. But she would call the guy over and start asking him questions very slowly while the pump kept running. So she would get full tanks of gas. She also told fantastic stories about Sheppy and Beverly's here, how the two of them would sit on the porch and the dog would come, and then the people who come, because Sheppy was sort of a Lothario and a rascal, and people, where's that dog? And she really, with a great sense of humor, could tell a great story and was ever ready when driving to remind you either that the light is green, like move it already, or that was a very dark orange. She enjoyed that. She sat up front with me lately. She didn't drive anymore, obviously. And always do this. Mom became that little girl from Berlin again the first time she and I went to return to Berlin. My parents both gave us a great gift, and all the grandchildren, that we've all been to Berlin, we've all been to Poland, and we've all seen it with their eyes firsthand, and cousins, and that just as the wall, okay, she remembered where things were and retraced her childhood steps. Mom loved to play Scrabble, yet always asking us how to spell things when not playing. But when she had the Scrabble board, somehow she was better at spelling. Mom was there for us. She supported decisions, not always agreeing, but she was there for us. She listened most of the time. But Mom was the best grandmother to Amy, helping me with her so much while I was working in the city, and later the best booby to her girls, who she loved more than anything. She was my mom, and she's take older, and I will always be thankful for her love and wisdom, even though I did not always agree growing up and gave her a hard time. But she still showed me her love and support all the time. I want to thank Kasha number 1, Kasha number 2, Kasha number 3, and Basha, Nana, Nati, and all others who were always there for Mom. Everyone loved her and expected and respected her. Mommy, I will miss you more than you can imagine, but my heart will always be full of you.
As Susan mentioned, Rita Adler was born April 24th, 1929, to Leo and Sabina Adler in Berlin. And as Susan mentioned, that was the first night of Passover. And what I'm so moved to hear today was a kind of Haggadah. Haggadah means telling. And it's the incredible telling of Rita's life story through those who knew her best and loved her so deeply. I really mostly, except for Simon's funeral, I mostly only saw her at Simchas. I saw her at Lexi and Rachel's Benot Mitzvah. And every time they came to shul, joy, the smile. And to hear about all the sorrows she endured as a child, and then the trajectory of her life, how it ultimately led to such beauty and peace, is incredibly moving. In a few hours, we will, I think, and I had a wonderful conversation with Mark and Susan and Ellen yesterday, and I'm, I think everything has been said so beautifully and so meaningfully. And in a few hours, we will welcome in Shabbat. This Shabbat is called Shabbat Nachamu. It's the first Shabbat following Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is a fast day, the lowest day on the Jewish calendar, a day of mourning, which took place last Saturday night and Sunday. And the Shabbat that follows, that is always called Shabbat Nachamu, the Sabbath of comfort. And Simon had chanted Haftarah, and Mark regularly chants Haftarah at TMV. The Haftarah this Shabbat starts with the words Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. My people shall surely be comforted. And this is the first of 7 Haftarot of consolation, leading us Le'ela, Le'ela, higher and higher, up to the high holidays. And there were 2 things that it kind of struck me as I was thinking about this in relation to Rita Berger. First, I pray that all who are grieving may also be comforted as they celebrate the incredible life of a spectacular woman. And second, the trajectory itself from loss to comfort, to me, parallels her own life story. The transformation from a life of war and displacement to a life of peace, companionship, and deep, deep love. Rita's resilience, her strong Jewish identity, her ability to adapt and move forward, her beautiful smile, and most of all, her love and dedication to her family will never be forgotten. May her memory always be a blessing Zichrona Livracha. Rita Berger is lovingly remembered by Susan and Bob of blessed memory, Ellen and Dave, Mark and Doris, her beloved grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Amy and Yaniv, Talia, Lexi, and Rachel, Liat and Noah, and her adored and adoring nephews, nieces, and cousins from the US, Canada, and Israel. And Mark said, he shared this with me, if we named everyone, we'd go into overtime on the room rental. She loved you all. We honor her memory today, and we will continue to share memories of Rita during Shiva. Following this ceremony, the interment will take place at the New Montefiore Cemetery, and Shiva will begin immediately thereafter at Ellen's home, 257 East Olive Street, Long Beach, New York. Hopefully you have the address, and you may know that it continues Sunday, 1 to 8 p.m., Monday, 3 to 8 p.m., and then on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 4 to 8 p.m., the family will be sitting Shiva at Susan's home in Manhattan at 65 West 13th Street, apartment 5I. Immediately following the ceremony, those who are going to the cemetery, which is not far from here, will find our way to our cars. And we will now conclude the ceremony with the El Malay Rachamim memorial prayer. Please rise. Malay Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nekona תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. את נשמת סורה רבקה, בת צבי אליעזר הכהן וסימה, שלחה לעולמה. בגן עדן, תהא מנוחתה. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתך, ותנוח בשלום על משכבך, ונאמר Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, to the soul of Rita Berger, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
all